Welcome to Coach Bennett's podcast, where every run has a purpose, where kindness is hardcore, where this is about running, and this is not about running, where every starting line is a finish line in disguise, where rambling still gets you where you need to be, where pineapple will never ruin your pizza, and the sodas, adult and not adult kind, are always cold, and where there is room on the starting line for everybody. I'm Coach Bennett. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 33 of Coach Bennett's podcast, and oddly enough, I think it's like 33 degrees outside Fahrenheit here in Portland, Oregon. We've had some really grade F weather over the last few days. It started out actually pretty nice with some snow. We don't get snow here a lot. When we do get snow, all types of chaos ensues. I think there's like one snow plow in all of Portland, and some guy named Hank has the keys, but he's down in the southeast on vacation and he has the keys, so there's no snow plow that we can use while we have snow on the ground here. So as a result, when it snows, the snow's just in the neighborhoods until it melts, until it decides to go away. Now, I grew up in the Northeast in New Jersey where the plows were lined up like they were about to go on some epic cavalry charge hours before the snow fell. You'd see all of these snow plows ready to rock and roll. They'd go out there and they would roll through. In fact, we would be disappointed when the plow would come through when we were younger. One, because before the plow came through, you could just play in the streets. And that meant that everywhere was open season during a snow day. You could go anywhere, backyards, it didn't matter. The rules did not apply probably like today, where people would probably complain if kids ran through their backyard. When I was growing up, you just went wherever you wanted to. There was no such thing as property rights during a snow day. As a kid, you just went where you wanted to go. If whatever you were playing kind of just, bled over into someone else's backyard, so be it. The football game could start in somebody's yard, and 2 hours later, you're 7-8 yards down the road. Who knows? It was chaos, and it was fantastic. And before the plows would come through like a neighborhood, that meant the streets were open season too. So you could go anywhere you wanted to. You could build forts wherever you wanted to. It was a dream. And then the plows would come through and we'd all boo and yell at them and, stand on the side of the road so the snow could kind of, just nail us. But it did actually have a benefit as a kid, because they would plow and the snow would get pushed to one side, which meant if you waited to really build a new fort until after the plow came through, then you had half of the fort already built, because the snow would get, shoved over to the side of the road and stacked up. And now all you had to do was build rooms. You had basically the structure. It would be like building a skyscraper, like a solid skyscraper, and then carving out the rooms as you went. So it's like just a solid rectangle. I'm talking too much. Okay. Anyway, the point is, a few days ago, it snowed, and it was beautiful, and it was nice. And then we actually had a second day where it didn't snow, but it was still nice, and it for whatever reason, it was just stayed snow, which is odd here for Portland, because usually what happens when we get snow, we have this glorious day of snowfall. It's just always so wet here that overnight, the snow turns into ice, and then you're out of luck. You can't do anything. You can't play on just ice. You know what I mean? And I know people, well, why don't you get your skates out? Okay, sorry, I don't have skates, in my closet to go play in the street. I didn't grow up in Canada. I grew up in New Jersey. I live in Portland now. The point is, it's icy and just dangerous. So if you just want to go out and get hurt, perfect conditions. Perfect conditions if you just want to go out and say, hey, you know what? I'm not so much in the mood for a run or even a hike, but I'd like to move around and get hurt. Perfect conditions in Portland right now. And that's where we're at right now. In fact, it's even worse because it's picked up in temperature a little bit. Like I said, I think it's 33. It got up to like 37 today. So it's just like freezing rain and slush on top of a sheet of ice. And it's just foggy and damp. It's just gross. It's really just gross and dangerous. Did I mention dangerous? So that's where I'm at right now. You can't even really go outside. I'm going to have to run around the house. I don't have a treadmill, and I want to go for a run. So I'm going to have to literally run around the house, and I'm trying to figure out the course I'm going to take. So I'll give you updates on that, but my goal is to get in a little bit of a run. Here's a hint for you, by the way. Let me just do this before we get into the episode. If you're forced to run inside your house and you don't have a treadmill, don't run for distance. Run for duration. Because the GPS is way up in the sky. It's very hard to figure out how far you're running. And what'll happen is if you say, well, I'm just going to run for a mile, it's going to take you like 30 minutes to run a mile inside your house. It may take even longer. But if you say, I'm going to run for 20 minutes, it takes 20 minutes. So always run for duration when you're running inside the house. Just a little tip from Coach Bennett. All right. Episode 33. Here we are. And this is what this episode is going to be all about. No motivation. I shouldn't say no motivation. Low motivation. Because usually what happens when people think they have no motivation, they're wondering, why don't I have any motivation? What can I do to get some motivation? So simply being motivated to wonder why you have no motivation means you've got some motivation. And I'll tell you what, all you need to get stuff done, you just need a little bit of motivation. You don't need the deepest reservoir of motivation to get something done. I just want to put that out there right now. So if you're somebody who's struggling to find motivation, and by the way, this time of year, we're getting to that point. End of January, early February, throughout February, really low motivation for a lot of people. Now, it's going to depend on where you live, but it is universal that there will be ebbs and flows too when you have lots of motivation and little motivation. I'm just saying where I live in North America, mid-January, late January, early February, it gets tough. It really does. The shine of those resolutions starts to get a little dim, and the days, well, they get shorter, the nights get longer, the weather can be weird. Suddenly you start questioning, like, why am I doing this? Why did I make a commitment to this? Or why did I resolve to change this in my life, or to try to do this, take on this challenge, this goal, this adventure, whatever it is? This is that moment where, I'm not going to say universally, but I think for the most part, people everywhere, post-New Year's, post-holidays, you start losing momentum. And a lot of people will equate losing momentum with losing motivation, when really losing momentum, it doesn't mean you have no momentum. You know what I mean? And having low motivation, like I said, doesn't mean you have no motivation, which is great. So this episode is going to be about what to do and how to handle when you find yourself with very low motivation, or maybe even think you've got no motivation. That's what we're going to talk about today. I think it's really important, not just for this time of year, for any time of year, because here's the reality. You will have periods of low motivation or seemingly no motivation throughout the year, throughout your life, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's taking on a big goal, taking on a small goal, taking on no goal, just living your daily life. You're going to have periods like this. So if you can be equipped ahead of time with how to handle it, you're going to handle it better. That's what I'm saying. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So feel free to take what you learned today into whatever else you're doing. It doesn't have to be about running. This is about running. This is also not about running, as you probably already knew. So let's dive in. Okay, the first thing I would recommend, if you find yourself in a situation where you're thinking, geez, what happened to my motivation? Where did it go? Or why do I have so little motivation? Is just talk to yourself. We don't do that. We have issues in our lives. And for whatever reason, we don't think to just talk to ourselves. We'll yell at ourselves. We'll demean ourselves. We'll beat ourselves up. But we won't try to have a meaningful conversation with ourselves. So here's another habit to try to develop. And maybe it's not a habit. It's just a way of life. Talk to yourself more. Have real conversations with yourself. I mean, like, seriously, we should all look at ourselves as our own best friends. You can have other best friends. You can have lots of best friends. One of your best friends should be yourself. One of your best teammates should be yourself. One of your biggest fans should be yourself. And one of the people that you know better than anyone else on this planet should be yourself. And the way you're going to do that is by having real, meaningful, heartfelt, honest, open conversations with yourself. So that's the first thing to do if you feel like you're low on motivation, is just have a conversation with yourself. And you know what you can do? You can start by just saying, why do you think that is? What's going on? And it can be any number of things. It could also be nothing. But let's just break down what it could be. And since this is, about running, I know, it's not about running. But since it's about running, one of the first places you can look is your training. Look at your training. What are you doing? Because one of the things that can happen is if you're overtrained, you can lose motivation. You can get burnt out physically, but also mindfully if you're overtraining. You can lose motivation even as you're gaining fitness. Let me just say that again. You can be losing motivation as you're gaining fitness if you're training the wrong way, if you're training too hard, if you're training too intensely, if you're constantly pushing, and not recovering. If you're not putting into the schedule, the training plan, needed rest, not just physical rest, but mental, mindful, emotional, spiritual rest associated with your training, well then you're going to burn out. And a lot of times, the way that burnout shows up first is slowly diminishing motivation. It gets harder and harder, seemingly, to make it to the starting line. It gets more difficult to do what you need to do on the other side of the finish line. So what I want you to do is first look at your training. Now, here's a couple of red flags. Are you doing the same thing all the time? Okay, I already talked about training too hard. We'll get to that again in a second. But one of the places I want you to look is, are you doing the same thing all the time? Is it the same recovery run on the same loop at the same time of day at the same pace? Are you doing basically the same speed runs? Are you doing no speed runs? Is the long run just this monotonous, same route, same distance every single time at the same effort? Are you constantly doing the same thing and equating that in your head with consistency when they don't need to be the same thing? Are you burning out because you're just doing the same stuff? The easiest thing sometimes is to think about your favorite song. Okay, what's your favorite song? It's the first one that comes into your head right now. What's your favorite song? Got it? Good. And I don't care. Maybe it's your top 3, top 5, but it's the first favorite song that came into your head. Great. Now imagine it's the only song you can listen to forever. Now you love that song, but I'll tell you what it does for you might change after you've heard it, 90 times in a row. If it's one of those songs that really gets you fired up, maybe you're not getting as fired up. If it's a song that really hits you emotionally, maybe it's just not resonating with you. Normally, by the time you get to that second chorus, you're basically crying and now you're just indifferent. The song hasn't changed. Your relationship with the song has changed because you've abused the privilege of listening to that song. And it's the same thing with training. Running is great. Running is powerful. Running is awesome. Doesn't mean running's always going to be easy. Doesn't mean running's always going to be fun. But I will tell you this, it won't be as much fun. And it will lose some of the luster, some of the joy, some of the meaning if you're relentlessly running the same thing every single day. If your speed run week in and week out is 8x200 or 8x400, or you go crazy and one week it's 8x400, the next week it's 8x200, I'll tell you what, you're going to be robbing yourself of the joy of running quarters and 200s. That's a fun workout. It's just not fun if it's the only workout you do. You need to mix things up. So I want you to do is look at your training and think, am I robbing myself of the joy in my running by relentlessly and constantly doing the same things over and over and over again? And listen, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you're in a situation where you're kind of forced to do something that can seem monotonous. Like the weather here in Portland may be bad for the next couple of days. In order to go for runs, I may need to go up to the track nearby because it's a black track and it tends to melt more quickly than the area around it. I may end up having to do a whole bunch of runs in a row just around a track. So yeah, that's just the reality of it. But I'm going in realizing this isn't what I'm always going to be doing. There's a reason why I'm doing this. There's a reason for the monotony. There's a reason for me constantly doing laps on the track. Now, I will also do this as a little public service announcement. If you're constantly running around a track, make sure you're even mixing that up. Run in the outside lanes, change directions. These are all sorts of things you can do. You can mix things up by doing 1 lap in lane 1, 1 lap in lane 2, 1 lap in lane 3, 1 lap in lane 4, and then 1 lap in lane 3, 1 lap in lane 2. You can go up and out and all sorts of things. You can do kind of like snake kind of runs on some laps. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do to just break up the constantly that's associated with running. So what I want you to do is look at your training. One of the reasons why you may be losing motivation is because you're losing the creativity that can come and should come with your running. You're not creating fun runs. You're not creating different runs. You're losing the diversity in your training. And when you lose the diversity, you lose a lot. You lose the quality. You lose the creativity, like I said. You lose the ability to surprise yourself, not just with what you're about to run, but how the run goes and how you react to the run that you're doing. So don't rob yourself of those things. But all of this means you need to look at your training. By the way, another reason to keep a running log. So you can look back and say, oh, geez, I've been running basically 20-minute runs every day for 3 straight weeks. And I've been running at 3 p.m. basically every single day. And I've been doing the same loop. I leave my apartment, I go down the road, I go around the park, and I come home. No wonder you're losing motivation. I mean, who wants to press play and listen to the same song again? We've been listening to the same song over and over and over again. And here's a great test. When you go on your next road trip with a friend, make a playlist and just put on repeat one song. See how many times you can get away with playing that before someone says, hey, can we listen to something else? It'll be almost immediate. I bet if you have a great conversation going, maybe you get through 2, potentially 3 plays of that song before your friend goes, what's going on? Now, if you say, I love this song, they're going to go, great, but we don't need to listen to it over and over and over again, right? And they'll probably tell you that's a great way to kill the song for you. So look at your training. And I'm going to mention again what I said at the beginning is sometimes your training can be wildly diverse and fun. But if you're working too hard, that means you're not going to be able to recover enough to have the requisite energy to have the run you need to have the next day or 2 days later or 3 days later, whatever. The point is every run you do, you have to look at it as you're expending a certain amount of energy. Okay? How you recover from that run, which means how you eat, sleep, drink, handle stress in your life, have relationships in your life, the other workloads in your life, all of that stuff you're navigating is going to be a part of who shows up to the next starting line you take. So one, you got to look at how you're recovering from your runs. That may be the answer for why you're so low on motivation. You're tired. You're worn out. You're exhausted. The other thing to look at is just the quality of those next workouts. Are you recovering enough on those workouts? And I'm just going to pause here. I know it takes energy to do a recovery run. There are people like, you shouldn't call a recovery run because it takes energy. Oh, stop it. We know that a recovery run is about more than just physically recovering. So the point is, if your easy runs are too hard and you're not keeping them easy enough, then you're not recovering enough. So the next time you do a hard workout or even an easy run, you're not where you should be. You could almost look at yourself as you're behind the starting line. And it takes effort just to get to the starting line. And every time you don't recover enough, you're getting further and further away to where you should be for that next run. It's almost like telling people, if you're not recovering enough, you're making your next easy run even longer. And you're making your next speed run even faster. And then if you don't recover from those, you're making your next easy run even longer. So you're supposed to be doing a 4K easy run. Well, because of your lack of recovery, it's now like an 8K easy run. Even though you're only running 4K, your body's treating it like much longer, much harder, much more taxing because it's already starting in the negative. So think of your training. Look at your training. Have a great conversation with yourself about your training, all right? Here's another thing. I started out this podcast talking about the weather. Look at the weather. Listen, we're humans. We are definitely, absolutely, positively affected by the weather around us. In Portland, we are in this process now. We've been in it since the end of October. It lasts until the end of May, where it more or less rains all the time. And if it's not raining, it's cloudy, and it's taunting us with rain. It's like, I might rain. I might. The only thing that breaks up the monotony between the beginning of November and the end of May is we get hail, like in the winter, and we get hail in early spring, and we're like, all right, something different. But even that gets boring because now suddenly we get more hail than ever before. But anyway, the point is, look at the weather. Is the weather have an effect on you? You can lose motivation with extreme weather or boring weather. I look at it as like the malaise of the weather. And listen, it doesn't have to be terrible weather for it to turn into like this malaise. It can be 72 and sunny every single day. And motivation-wise, yes, it's perfect conditions to go for a run. Yes, it's almost perfect conditions to go for a run. But sometimes almost perfect all the time loses its luster. It's only almost perfect for someone who's like living in Portland. If that's what you live in, it's just today. It's just kind of like, So my recommendation there is if the weather is, gloomy and damp and rainy and chilly and cold like it is in Portland, just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it and say, you know what? I'm really, really tired of running in this weather. And what you're going to do is you're going to find that when you admit it, you're also allowing yourself to deal with the problem, which is the weather sucks. So maybe it means, you know what? I'm going to pick a different time of day where there's a break in the clouds, or I'm going to change my environment completely. I'm going to run more in the woods where I'm not getting pelted with rain all the time. Or you twist it even the other way and you say, you know what? I'm going to now embrace how miserable it is because it's miserable. And rather than looking at it as, another run in the rain, I'm going to celebrate the fact that I'm running in the rain again. Maybe you end up starting like a rainy run crew where you get together every day that it rains. And it doesn't have to be in person. Maybe it's something where you're just supporting each other through social media, where you're celebrating those rainy runs. The whole point of what I'm bringing up is you have the ability to look at things a little bit differently. And sometimes that's all it takes. So if the weather is something that you're looking at and it's just draining you of motivation, take the time to maybe say, I'm going to look at it differently and I'm going to have it feed me motivation. That's all. But check out the weather. And yes, part of that is because I'm sitting in the middle of some awful weather. I mentioned the environment too in there, and I also want you to be looking at the environment that you're in, the environments that you're in. So look at school if you're in school. Look at your home life. Look at work. They can have an effect on your motivation in running. I see it all the time where runners think they're losing motivation about their running, and it's like, no, I think what's happening is you're getting sapped of a lot of energy and motivation and inspiration in other areas of your life, and you bring that with you to the starting line. You don't leave your life behind at the starting line. It comes with you. So if school's been stressful or home life has been very tough or work seems to be wearing you down, again, admit it. Have the conversation with yourself, the tough conversation with yourself, and say, I'm struggling a little bit here. And now you'll look at your run hopefully in a new way, that this run isn't supposed to be something that drains you. It's supposed to be something that fills you up. But that little conversation with yourself is also going to give you the insurance that you sometimes need when you do a run, to run the run with the right purpose and the right way. If you know you're coming from school drained and it's time to do a run, you're going to look at it, the run that is, as this is supposed to be something that makes me feel better about myself. It's supposed to be something that pushes me and challenges me in a positive way. And that means I've structured what this run is supposed to be before I even start it. So when I do begin it, and I'm struggling a little bit because I'm low on motivation, I'm not going to beat myself up for it. In fact, I bet you're more willing to celebrate yourself that I'm out here doing this and I'm dragging because school, work, home has been hard. What are you going to beat yourself up because you're beaten down from home life, work, or school? That would be stupid. That's not being a smart athlete. It's being a dumbass. So have these conversations with yourself, and what you're going to find, you're not only going to potentially come to maybe the reason or some of the reasons for your lack of motivation, your low motivation. You're also going to be setting yourself up to be a better teammate and friend to yourself, a better coach for yourself. And it all starts with those conversations with yourself. Now that we've got that covered, I'm going to give you a couple things that I usually do after I've had these conversations that are almost like supplements. All right, I don't take supplements, but if I were to take supplements, they probably wouldn't be supplements. They'd be stuff like this. I go to sources of inspiration and motivation when I'm low on inspiration and motivation. I find massive amounts of both motivation and inspiration in music. I rely heavily on music. Music is one of the places I go to when I'm low on motivation and low on inspiration. Music is one of my hype people. You know what I mean? So when I'm like dragging, I go and I'm like, I need you to tell me something. And I put on some music and it tells me something. It tells me what I need to hear. I use music to get me focused. I use music to give me endurance. I use music to tell me the stories I need to hear. When I feel like my own story is kind of just running out of steam, I use music. I also use movies. I also use books and articles and videos. I search for motivation and inspiration in a lot of places. I go to certain people in my life that I know will get me back on track when I feel like I've kind of skirted off the rails a little bit, where I'm like, you know what, I don't know if I want to do this, and I start questioning things. I want to go to sources, people that know me and know why I'm doing things, so they can, in some ways, remind me of what I already know. But I'm starting to question. And what I really need is somebody to reaffirm some of the affirmations that I used to have, and now maybe I've lost a little bit of my grip on. So think of the people in your life. Think of the sources of inspiration and motivation that can kind of shake you out of this a little bit, or at least remind you of who you are and what inspires you and what motivates you and why you're doing what you're doing. Because here's the thing. No matter what you're taking on, if it's something great, extraordinary, worthwhile, it's not always going to be easy. You're not always going to be motivated to do it. You're not always going to be inspired to do it. I don't care how great it is. You're not always going to be super motivated or inspired about it. That's just the way it is. You can't expect yourself to be. I get asked all the time, how do you stay motivated all the time? I'm not motivated all the time. I'm not. I have the luxury of having almost an infinite amount of sources of motivation and inspiration. I'm talking about all of you, and I rely on all of you. And when you tell me things like you got through a hard run, or you did your first run, or you came back from an injury, or you treated yourself like a great teammate, or you invited somebody to a starting line, these things inspire and motivate me. So when I'm low on motivation and inspiration, I've got all of you. Not all of you have that luxury of an amazing amount of people telling you great stories. But those great stories are out there. So find that community. And you don't even have to know everyone. Just search for these stories, or listen to music, or watch those movies, or read those books. Find those magazine articles. Listen to those podcasts and get inspired again. It's there. It's all around you. You know, inspire comes from basically the term for breathing. And I think that's a great way of looking at inspiration. It's everywhere. we just don't always see it. It's the same thing with oxygen. I'm told it's all around me. I just got to take people's word for it. I don't see it, but I'm breathing. So you just have to understand, or at least just give me the benefit of the doubt here. There's inspiration all around you. You just got to look for it the right way. All right? So find those sources of inspiration and motivation. Okay, another thing, I hinted at it earlier about sometimes, the lack of diversity in your training can be one of the reasons why you kind of get into a rut. Well, let me just tell you a few ways that you can diversify your training, if that's the case with you. If you run the same route every single day, I feel like I've said this on a couple of podcasts, but it's the simplest way without, going crazy and making lots of changes. Just run the route the opposite way, different direction. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, here's another neat thing you can do. If you're really low on motivation or inspiration, walk the route that you normally do. It's going to take longer, obviously, but walk it. Because a couple of things will happen when you walk some of the routes that you run. And maybe you got 2 or 3. Pick the shortest one, walk it. Take your time and walk it. You will have a newfound respect for how much ground you cover on your runs. And sometimes that's the key to getting some motivation and inspiration, is taking a step back and realizing what you are doing, what you've already done, and how badass it is. But that's a little sneaky thing in there. Like, walk part of your run, or walk the entire run. Just don't run that day. Just go for a walk and just soak up the distance that you cover on a run. The other thing is this: when you walk one of your routes, you see the route differently. It does not look the same as when you run it. It's just the way it is. There was a place called Huddart Park in Woodside, California that I used to run quite often when I ran for the Nike farm team when I got out of college at Carolina. I don't know what happened. Maybe I rolled my ankle or something. I forget exactly what happened. But the point is, I had to walk the last 2 miles or 3K of this run in the park that I had done maybe 150 times. And I remember there were a couple times where I got a little nervous, I don't know where I'm at. And I was just on the trail that I had run, like I said, over 100 times. But it looked so different walking it. And I thought, wow, this is magical. It's like a brand new park. It's a totally different park when I'm walking it, and I can actually notice these things. I'm not looking for routes. I'm not checking out the bend. I'm not paying attention to my watch. I'm just really walking and enjoying myself. And it was a completely different experience. So it's something that you can do to mix things up, but also give yourself a little pat on the back, wow. Because I'll tell you what, walking 3K takes a long time. A lot longer than running 3K. And I was like, geez, we cover a lot of distance that we take for granted. So that's just something to think about. But there's a lot of different things you can do to diversify your training. Obviously, the types of runs you do, the time of day, who you're running with. Listen, I'm going to put a little challenge out here. Find a group of people that go for a run. I don't care if they're slower than you or faster than you, or however you're doing your little metric about this group. 99.9% of the groups out there want more people to meet them for runs. Go, and if you end up running alone, fine. Talk to people beforehand, talk to people afterwards. Maybe you run with people during the run. But again, let the run be about you and your fitness level. Don't do anything you're not comfortable with. Because what I want you to do is be comfortable before the run and after the run and during the run. But here's the thing. It will send shockwaves through your running life, knowing that you can show up and run with strangers that eventually might become teammates and friends and supporters. But there's my challenge to you. Find some new people to run with. Invite some friends out for a run. Doesn't have to be a long run. Doesn't have to be a hard run. It's just a run. It could be 5 minutes together. Just say, hey, let's just meet for 5 minutes. People need starting lines. And I think people also need to invite others to the starting line. So there's so many different ways you can diversify your running and bring diversity into your training. You can change the paces, you can change the terrain, the time of day, the type of run, so many different things. Who you run with, all of it. It's all open to you to mix things up. So mix things up, because sometimes what you need is motivation to do something different, to challenge yourself in a new way, or give yourself a break from doing the same stuff over and over and over again. Come on. And another thing you can do, which kind of diversifies the run also, is make the run about something more than just running. Obviously, it's going to be about the run. You're going for a certain distance. You're going for a certain duration. You're doing a run. You want some type of a physical benefit from it. But make it about something more than just the run. Like, one of the things I do to kind of trick myself into doing a run that I don't think I want to do because I feel like I'm unmotivated to do it is I will have a purpose to the run beyond just running. So, for instance, if there's like one of my kids has a track meet at their school, I would sometimes be like, oh, I don't want to run today. You know what? I'm going to run to the meet. I want to watch them run. I got to get there. I'll just run there. And then I'll get a ride back from my wife. Like, I'm just going to run to the meet because now I have a purpose. The purpose isn't just running. I want to see them. Like, and I'm not going to drive. I'll run there. And it changes the entire complexion of the run. I'm no longer thinking like, oh, what's my pace and how many minutes have I run and how many meters am I going? I just got to get to B. I'm starting at A. I want to be at B because that's where the race is and I want to see my kids. And that's what I do. Or I'll flip it. I'll be at a track meet and I'll say, I'm just going to run home. Because if I get home, I'm not going to want to run. But I want to get home. And I want to get home more than I don't want to run. So I'll just run home. And I get it done. Sometimes I'll say, you know what? I want to listen to something. There was a great interview, and I'm not going to listen to it sitting down on the couch. I'm going to listen to it while I'm running. And I'm almost 99% engaged in the content that I'm listening to while I'm running. So the focus isn't on running because I'm unmotivated to run. I just don't feel like running. But I want to listen to this podcast. I want to listen to this interview. I want to listen to this new album. So what I'll do is I'm going to listen to it while I'm running. And then I get the run over with, but it wasn't really about the run. It was about the music. It was about the interview. It was about the podcast. See, what you can do is you can make your run about more than just running because sometimes, let me just be honest with you, you're not motivated to run. You're low on motivation and you're not inspired. You're low on inspiration to run. Fine. But you still want to run somewhere. So how can you make this less about the run and more fun? Well, make it less about the run. All right, and the last thing I'm going to bring up here, because I feel like, I don't want you to be uninspired to listen to the rest of this podcast. So I'm going to just wrap it up with this. The other thing to do right now is to write down why you run and list all of it. Why do you run? Maybe you're training because you want to, do your first 5K, or you want to feel stronger. You want to feel more confident. It's a great stress reliever. You've never run 2 miles in a row. You've never run 2 hours in a row. You want to do your first race. It makes you feel strong. It makes you feel happy. It makes you feel successful. Whatever. Write it all down. All of the reasons. Write them all down. And the reason why is when you're unmotivated, when you're lacking inspiration, read it. Go back to it. And this is what I want you to write at the bottom of it. I'm running for all of these reasons. Running makes me feel all of these things. And sometimes I'm not going to want to do it. But, and then write all of the things you're training for, all of the things you're running for, and all of the great feelings that it gives you. So, write down why you're running. Write down all the feelings that running gives you, all of the positive things that running gives you, and then write down, and still sometimes I'm going to be uninspired, low on motivation, and feel like I don't want to run, because that's the reality. And then you can look at those things and say, okay, I'm just low on motivation. I'm uninspired, but this is what I want and this is what it gives me. So it's worth it to do another run. Assuming you're not burnt out and exhausted and fatigued, like I said at the beginning, which is why at the beginning I brought up at the beginning, you need to ask yourself why. And if you're burnt out, then guess what? All of those things that running gives you and that you're training for, you will not experience if you're starting in a negative, if you're in a hole, if what you need is actually to not run. So we're coming full circle, okay? Sometimes the best run is no run. And you can be a runner even when you're not running by being a smart runner. So if you need full rest and full recovery, not a recovery run, full recovery, no running, then you need to be able to look at that list of things and say, running gives me all these things. Okay, right now in the state I'm in, Running can't give me those things because the run I'm going to run is incapable of supplying those things because it's the wrong thing to do. It's just like you don't run when you're sick, you don't run when you're injured. That's not how you build fitness. That's how you tear down an athlete. So there it is. There's episode 33. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you loved it. Now, I would do a mailbag. I haven't been able to get to the post office in a couple of days, so we're just going to have to double down on the mailbag next week. And also, we're about 2 weeks away. I'm just going to slide this in here at the end of Best Runner Ever Winter Edition. That's right. Coach Tammy, Mindset Coach Extraordinaire of the Show Up Society, and myself have a 4-week program starting at the beginning of February, lasts throughout February. It is going to be an unbelievable group coaching community. I want you to be a part of it. The link is in the show notes. It's going to be a blast. I'm super excited about this. Starts on February 1st. So check out the details. Find out how you can register. Be a part of this awesome community in February as we run our way or hike or walk. We're going to move our way through February better than we ever have before and closer to our best runner ever that we all have inside of us. So I want you to check that out too. And most importantly, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to episode 33 of Coach Bennett's podcast. We have started this year out strong. Thank you to everyone that has subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed or followed on Spotify or Apple, Google Podcasts, or all those other cool places, please do. Okay, please do. It really, really does help. And if you're sharing the podcast with a friend on social media, please tag me so I can celebrate you and your friend for listening. Really, it just does mean the world that you're giving me some of the finite amount of time that you have every day. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And until episode 34, or Coach Bennett's newsletter, which there should be another one coming out pretty soon, take care of yourself and take care of each other. I'll meet you on that next starting line. Thank you so much for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast today. And if you're not already following or subscribed to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening, well, I really wish you would because it helps a lot. Also, check out the show notes because you'll find a link to Coach Bennett's newsletter, as well as all the social media sites that I'm on. Places like Threads and Facebook and Instagram and Mastodon and YouTube, and even the artist formerly known as Twitter, whatever that dumpster fire is called today. You'll find a link to it because I'm on there. Thank you so much again for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself.